I always had this sort of desire to maybe do something a little bit outside the box. And also my dad, growing up, he was a sea captain. So ever since I was a small boy, we always been traveling around. So you need to adapt. And I guess some of those things have helped me later.
How would you say that you typically evaluate companies? Do you source everything by yourself, or do companies come to you? How does that sourcing process look like?
When we look at companies coming in, we have sort of 4 initial criteria, because you need to be very good at sourcing out the right opportunities. It's very important to have a strong filter, be clear on who you can work with and who should probably find somebody else. If those 4 checks, then we're on the route to looking at it more closely. Well, I'm from the West Coast in Norway, just grew up in Bergen, but then fairly quickly moved outside. So I'm what you call in Norway a stril, which is sort of a farmer boy that we had to sort of row into the city to sell the fish in the old days. So I grew up in a small place, played soccer, was a bit of a shy guy. I was always the smallest in my class for many, many years. And that's something maybe happened during high school when I started more interested in the artistics. I danced in the school play, and I did all kinds of things, and I thought I was going to be an engineer. But then eventually I ended up, after my military service, to go the business route. So I can't explain why I ended up there, but I met a very interesting guy during my military service, and I guess he was the sort of pivot for that. And life is full of those things, as you know later.
Yeah. But who was that guy then, and what did he bring to you?
He was just, I don't know, I've always been very interested in the technical things, all nitty-gritty stuff. But he just brought this sort of sense of commercial pragmatism in some shape or form. So it got me curious. But I'm an engineer inside, but I'm a business guy outside, on the outside. But it's strange. But I've been thinking about that. What would have happened if I went with my original plan? So I think everybody knows, when you sort of have lived for a while, that life is full of those small pivot points.
Definitely. But you ended up going to America for studies, right? So how many years did you stay there, and what do you think were the most valuable lessons you got from that experience?
Well, first I did a couple of years in Norway, but then I always had this sort of desire to maybe do something a little bit outside the box, and going to the US. This is some years ago. I'm afraid to say it's been a while already, but it was a little bit of a step outside. But I studied there for 3 years in LA, and I did my business studies. And I think the sort of coming out, this is back in 88 to 91. It's coming away from everything and then just meeting so many new people. And already then, this school was full of international students. I mean, probably 30-40% Asians, a lot of Americans, of course, but also Europeans. So I think it just sort of got me very interested in the sort of whole international space. And it just happened to be that's what I've been working with ever since. And also my dad, growing up, he was a sea captain. So ever since I was a small boy, we always been traveling around. So I think that sort of exploration part maybe is part of the old Western Norway Viking thing that is in there somewhere, but that was probably the best experience. And then also understanding that you need to deal with all these kind of people and need to adapt. And I guess some of those things have helped me later.
In this period in LA, what are sort of the biggest topics at the business scene, any specific industry? Like, where are we in the cycle? What did you get exposure to?
This is 88. It's still early days of tech. I remember I bought my first Macintosh at that time, which was like, you couldn't get hold of it in Norway even. So you got the first sort of, feeling of the new tech industry. But LA was really also very much of a sort of melting pot. Maybe not so much known for the business as such, but the whole, industry of entertainment, crazy people, everything kind of extreme. And I think maybe that was more the inspiration, if anything, that you got a lot of exposure to a very, very different world than Norway at the time.
Definitely. So after that period, you decided to go back to Norway. What were your ambitions at that time? Did you have a clear plan and trajectory, or was it about, okay, seeing what opportunities that comes along and let's take it from there?
I mean, first, I think to be realistic, in '91, Norway's economy was on the way down. And I quickly realized that the only sort of serious target I could have is to get a job. And I started as a school teacher, actually, because at the time I needed some income. So while I was sort of applying for a real job in a way, I took a 6-month stint as a school teacher, and I loved it. And I even had sort of students there that were sort of graduating and got a lot of responsibility very early. And I really, ever since, I always remind myself that I maybe in a second life I should be a teacher. But I guess, you can sort of transform that sort of, into other settings as well. But what happened was I applied a few things, and then I got lucky. I ended up connecting with some people in Norsk Hydro, and 500 people applied for the job. I never thought I would get it. And again, this sort of thing where a small little coincidence made me connect with one of the guys that was hiring, and eventually I got the job. And that was really, again, one of those things I could never plan it. I got a job as a trader in a commodity team with Norsk Hydro International, and it actually sort of ended up being already then thinking, what can I ever do in life that is better than this? And I guess that's been ever since, that there's always a new thing, and you really get excited, and then you think that you're on top of the world, but there's always something else out there, right? But that was really my first job experience, which hit a lot of the things that I guess I was sort of preparing in life to become, and that's been sort of dealing with the international business scene.
Interesting. So, but at the trading job, did you sort of also get then a passion for trading side, etc.? Because you also in the next job ended up running a firm focused on derivatives, right? So how was that finance? Did it grow as a passion more and more? Or did you always have a keen interest on it?
Well, to be honest, I've never been a finance guy, so I understand it and I can deal with it. But I think the dealing and wheeling part, the dealing with people, the sort of very volatile daily job, dealing with taking a lot of decisions without perfect information, having to deal under time pressure, all those things, more generic stuff, was what made me tick. And we dealt with gas and oil and shipping and so on. When I then ended up in being part of starting Immorex, which was actually my first time as a founder title wasn't made up at that time. So you just started a company in a way, right? So, but then being part of that startup really was similar things. I could use some of my experience from the previous job. I knew the industry, I knew the people, but then most of all, it was again taking another risk, because I left a fairly stable job with a solid employer. My dad, in fact, he's probably more of the older type. When I came home and said I was going to leave Norsk Hydro, which at the time was maybe one of the most serious employers in Norway, and leave to do a startup, he just couldn't believe it. I mean, that was for him unthinkable. But I think I just wanted to get into the next thing, and then that was another sort of risky venture. But it turned out very well, and I think that has sort of given me lessons that I'm still applying today in my job as a venture sort of investor.
Yeah. How deep was that, learning curve running and starting a new company? Because it comes with risk, as you say. So,
well, this was again, I have this tendency of picking bad timing when I do new things. This was just when .com was sort of coming down, and it was like 2000, 2001. And we got the money. We thought we had a great plan. We had a good team, and then the macro just turned against us, and .com went south, and everybody pulled away. I have this sort of picture in my head that I'm running on a big beach, and there's a huge wave coming behind me. It's going to crush on the beach, and it's all about getting on dry land. And we got on dry land, but we were very wet on our backs, and we almost drowned, but we didn't drown. And a couple of years, it was tough. Then we turned. We again got a pivot that was partly luck and partly, I guess, stamina. Got new money, and 2 years later, we took that company public, and we ended up with a sort of 120 million US market cap in the end. So I guess, for me, I couldn't have planned that. I couldn't have sort of, but you just have to live in the moment and sort of play your cards and be willing to pivot when you need to pivot. And then it's all about execution and stamina. Because the plan was good, it wasn't brilliant, but I think the execution in the end turned out to be very good. And that's why we saved it and didn't sort of ended up as part of history. But of course, that for me personally has given a lot of that confidence, and it also kickstart my next sort of venture was into more working with private equity. Exactly. So Imrex is always sort of a very, very important part of my sort of my if you will history in terms of showing also that you can, if you believe enough and work hard enough, you can actually get through quite a lot of hardship.
Yeah, interesting. So what were the experiences that led you on to the investment route? Because we're obviously going to talk about your new fund today, of course, but
sure.
How did it all start, the investment?
Well, I'm still old enough that I have a little intermezzo before I get there. So, and that was after I worked with this startup. I ran across a gentleman who has sort of I worked with quite a lot after that, and that's Reynir Indahl, who is now the founder of Summa, and he was then partner in Altor, and they needed a CEO for a tech company they had acquired, and again, this is one of those things. We were stock listed with Imrex. We were top of the world. It was so much fun. I never had a better job. And then I found a way to argue for myself that this is the time to change. So then I ended up being a CEO for a company called SPT Group that was owned by Altor. And they were on a sort of a scaling run. And we worked with that. And as I signed on to and started, then the financial crisis hit. So again, a little bit of that headwind. But we came through, and it ended up being very, very good scale up. And eventually we sold that company to Schlumberger in 2012. And that was my first experience of working with professional owners like private equity and seeing from behind and inside how they work, how they think. And then I spent a year and a half in Schlumberger managing the software division there. But when I was finished with my, mandatory work, then I wanted to get back into, and that's why when I started to hook up with some of the other funds. And so you're talking maybe 8 to 9 years since I really started working 100% with the interface between operations and investments.
But before Sandwater become a fund, there is a long prehistory there, right? There are some investments that are summed together, etc. What is sort of the history behind it?
Well, I mean, since we're sort of doing the whole chronology here, I mean, fast forwarding after working a little bit with EQT and then ending up with Summa, we ended up, and we being a bunch of, I would say, individuals that had different roles in business and private equity, we ended up investing in a few early stage companies. And that was interesting since I was one of the more operational guys on the team. I ended up spending more time. And then I joined Summa. And Summa had at the time a very early purpose of sort of investing into, the right thematics. But of course, they were investing at a much later stage. So, but through that, we got a lot of opportunities, deal flow that obviously wasn't ready for a Summa, but was more prone for venture. So we ended up investing in a number of these companies. So kind of my idea of Sandwater started maybe 4 or 5 years ago, thinking that, well, you can do this full time. I mean, this is fun and it's a lot of opportunity. and I'm seeing more and more that the thematics that Summa was driving at could equally work well for venture. So maybe 2.5 years ago, we were thinking that, we can do this full time. So I left Summa. We took that portfolio of companies with us and created a strategy around that and build a new Sandwater fund, which we are now in full sort of operation with, build that on top. So that's sort of the legacy part, and that was the sort of lead into what then has become Sandwater.
Maybe we should go through the different sectors because it's a clear, thematic approach here. So do you want to go through them? The resource efficiency, health, and climate. Why exactly those three sectors?
Yeah, and again, I'm not shy to say that you need to steal with pride, and obviously being inspired a bit by Summa, but also seeing what else was happening, and also the interest and the experience I had myself, but also people that ended up becoming part of Sandwater. I think the whole, we call it regenerate, which is the area of thematics that talks about waste to value, agri-tech, new energies, and those themes are so much, addressing some of the really key challenges. And also it locks into what Norway and the network we have are very strong in. So I think there's some natural sort of reasons why these themes can come out of this area, Norway and Nordics, and also our own networks, and also where we believe that it has some anti-fragility in terms of how the markets are moving now. And that is also part of it. So that's a very important theme for us. We have a second theme that we call Vitalize, which has to do with healthcare, vitalizing health and education. And we have some investments there. And the third one is sort of improving tech to improve people's lives. And those are very often into sort of democratizing processes or taking down barriers or prop tech and other energy efficiency type of technology. So it's still wide. It's not like it's super, but it's more thematic. So it's not just pure generalist. And we see a lot of excitement and interest in those themes, and it resonates well with our investors, LPs, but also with companies that we're dealing with.
But it's so interesting, just to touch on the thing you mentioned before, that you got sort of this idea from working with Summa, because you saw so many great companies in these areas, but they weren't, fitting in the right scale and size, right? So that seems like a very good start if you're setting up a fund to really know that there are enough opportunities here that these will actually work, because you need a deal flow, right, to be attractive.
Yeah, and some of the setup around, I mean, there's so many ways you can try to differentiate yourself in venture or in most of the things, right? And what we were thinking is, what can we do that adds value and creates a little bit of an edge into this sort of market of sort of the Nordics venture market. And of course, a little bit has to do with believing in certain important themes, so that we bring also to the table knowledge and passion and conviction, those things to those themes. Of course, it is very much to do with the people involved, but also the network and where we think we can source and the credibility we might have, but also understanding how we can leverage the network with reaching into other both investors and companies and people that could be relevant for this. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to play on, use our network, use our background and so on. The other one is also, of course, understanding what are the opportunities, or trying to understand what are the future opportunities, and how can we understand the business model that hopefully is required to make this happen. So, and I think if you look at fundraising for a new fund, as a first-time fund, you always get, met by this, okay, but your first time, you haven't delivered anything. What's so special with you? Why should we put the money on you? And then everybody expects, good team, good strategy, but you need to sort of make yourself credible. And I think, having that focus on those assets that I just described, the capabilities combined with the network, and also the strategy that people believe can be an attractive for companies. That's kind of where we're trying to make an edge, and so far it's sort of proved good.
you touched upon fundraising, which is super interesting because it also, sometimes relies on timing, etc., which you also have mentioned sometimes now. So what was the general, conclusion after doing a big fundraising? What are the key principles?
I think timing, and that's half luck and half sort of hopefully conscious work. But I think obviously having the core and understanding what the different LPs would challenge you on, and it's kind of like I describe it a bit like when you're setting up a new fund, you're building a huge foundation with huge thick walls. It's like a house, right? Big house, huge thick walls, a lot of wiring inside, a lot of stuff, and you're building one floor. And that foundation can take 10 floors. So you need to invest a lot in the foundation. It needs to be rock solid. Otherwise, you won't get the first floor. So that is a lot. Structure, compliance, all these things. And that takes a lot of time to invest in. And then you need to have like we discussed already, a strategy that sort of hits somebody. And then after that, it's just stamina, lots of meetings. And eventually, you need to also be good at playing the momentum, so that you need to have somebody who steps up first so that the others will follow. And our sort of advantage, we had very good supporters. We had initial supporters that also is investors in the fund that are very credible people. I mentioned Reynir already. Christian Sinding from EQT is one of our investors, and Anders Mysen from EQT. So there's a number of people that bring certain credibility. And after that, then you need to work very intensely to build a core of investors that other people want to follow. So we've done fundraising now in 2 rounds. First, we took in 220 million, and now we're at close to 700 million. But we still have another sort of round to go. So it takes a year, and it's I mean, I can't say it's my favorite, but I know it's part of the deal, and you need to do it, and it's very important to get the right investors, because you're doing this for long term. So if we're going to make the 10 floors on this thing, we need to have investors that want to be with us. So you need to invest in making the right followers. It's like in any startup, it's very important who you get around the table when you take in money. So it's not different.
Get the right people on board.
We are a startup ourselves. I mean, in many ways, we're doing the same thing. It's just in a different industry.
100%. So if we're going to talk a bit about the investment philosophy, how would you say that you typically evaluate companies? Do you source everything by yourself, or do companies come to you? How does that sourcing process look like?
I think, we all want to become very proactive around our themes. I think so far, since we are relatively new and we also are still in the fundraising mode, a lot of the transactions or opportunities are coming through our network, which is also part of the thesis that the network will provide, because in a way, a lot of people that we work with will often refer deals to us. So, and we are very conscious that we always want to co-invest. So this is not a competitive, it's competitive, but it's not it's competitive in a different way than if you look at private equity later stage, because in venture, you always cooperate with people. So, and since we are a minority investor, we will always have other people that we will co-buy when we invest. So that opens up for a lot of collaboration. And so the deal flow comes a lot through network, other cooperating funds, people we know. But of course, over time, we will also work very much proactively looking at companies in certain sectors that we want to be, and try to be early on the curve. When we look at companies coming in, we have sort of 4 initial criteria, because to be honest, sometimes you can get a lot of opportunities, but you need to be very good at sourcing out the right opportunities that fits your mandate, but also that is good for the company. And we need to look at, does it have the sort of does it have the quality of the rig? We call it rig or the team, the setup. I mean, is that something that has the potential? And is it quality all around? That's number one. It needs to be something that you can really believe in. Can it go 10 times? Can this really scale? I mean, is the business model there, market? So is it a sort of hugely scalable business? Thirdly, does it have the impact criteria that we are looking for? Because we do have a very strong impact agenda in Sandwater. So we need to understand, what does that impact mean? And it's not being a good citizen. I mean, that also, but primarily we're looking for, what does the business model itself create of impact if they succeed? That's kind of the core of what we're looking at. So we need to have a check on that. And also, can Sandwater contribute in a good way? And also, in a way, as a selfish way, do we want to work with these people? Do we want to work with this sort of topic? If those four checks, then we're on the route to looking at it more closely. But then, of course, there's so many other things that you need to go through. But it's very important to have a strong filter, be clear on who you can work with, and who should probably find somebody else. And then you need to sort of spend time. But obviously, there's very, very few of those we talk to. Also, those we select to move on with, there's very few we end up investing in.
Yeah. What's your favorite questions to ask founders? Is it about truly understanding what they want? Because like you said, many of the criteria can be there, but if it's not like suitable with their visions and their ideas, it's not going to be a very fruitful cooperation, probably.
Yeah, and on that topic, of course, not as a saying on that topic, obviously you want to understand, what are they looking for? What do they need of help? Where do they look for inspiration or assistance or advice? And the reason why that is an important question is also to understand, how open are they? What are they really looking for? Are they open and sort of for their own weaknesses, or are they only saying the right things? So I think that conversation with the founder or the founder team is quite important. And we have some that are very conscious and they're very open, and I think they dare to be vulnerable in a way. I mean, to be sort of sensitive, that they don't have all the answers. And some are the opposite. They might come across as they know everything, and maybe that's not the ones that we want to work with.
What's the toughest questions you get from the companies you interact with? Do they ask some difficult questions?
Oh yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, some of the difficult questions could be, because all companies, everybody's convinced that they have something special, obviously, because that's, but then it's also important to have a discussion, what is really special and what is generic stuff. Because in most cases, there's maybe 30% of what people do is very special. I mean, something you need to really understand is different tech, is special tech, or is something. And then the rest of it is pretty generic. It's about organization, it's about structure, it's about sales, and blah, blah. And then, of course, trying to understand how and meeting what can I actually contribute with? Because if I'm not a tech person that knows the tech that you're in, how can I help you? So I guess that conversation about how we can help and assist and work and lift the case, despite the fact that we're not experts in what they do, that is probably sometimes the difficult one. I believe in it because I do believe there's a lot of learnings, but I think sometimes as a first-time founder, maybe it's not something that is obvious, that there is a lot of learning out there that you can just take in, and then you can allow yourself to play with the special part. So that conversation, I think, sometimes can be challenging to get across.
Definitely. There's a saying in investing that everybody has their blind spots. Do you know which blind spots you have as an investor?
I maybe I can engage myself very early. So I'm quite optimist, a little bit FOMO sometimes, but I'm quite a pragmatic optimist. So maybe I can get very engaged early. which obviously then the blind spot could be that I need to be sort of critical to myself and to what could be challenges, not to be carried away. The positive side of that, of course, is that if you have we have other people on the team, so we balance each other, and that's part of what the team should be. That somebody can, dare to sort of push it a bit out, and then somebody can dare to sort of hold back and try to be critical, and that's why I'm so happy with the team that we have, that we balance each other.
How conscious have you been about creating the right culture? Because you've been a part of so many different organizations, I guess, so you've seen a lot of different strategies in terms of culture. So how would you summarize the culture you're trying to build in Sandwater? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, it's a tough question because then you're putting me on the spot here. In terms of, first of all, I guess it's a bit of and several of the people on our team have been around for a while. I mean, we lived through a few things, so maybe on average we're quite an experienced team. Which means a good thing with that is people have seen what works and what doesn't work, so you can sort of be a little bit relaxed on that. And of course, the flip side is that people have made their self experiences that you are sort of strong personalities. But I think most of all, we're trying to create a very pragmatic, relaxed, hierarchy-free setup where we share. We are not into titles or sort of positions or things like that. And of course, as a small team of 5, it's easy. But it has to do with also trying to get that culture across to those we work with. So, not having, I mean, we have principles, but we're not afraid of trading with principles. We're pragmatic. We don't have a lot of hang-ups, and we try also to be coming across as being, we want to be approachable and collaborative internally, but we also really want to have that come across outside. So a little bit of that sort of, pay forward in a way, or sort of give first, right? Because if you dare to give a bit without necessarily asking back, I believe, and I've seen that many times, I believe you will get what you deserve in a way over time. So some of that thing hopefully can be part of it. We've had people asking us, well, you kind of say that it's so flat and everybody sort of, can it really be so? And for instance, very often in private equity, you have something called an investment committee where it's quite stringent with voting rights and who is for and against. We try not to do that. We try to do decisions by discussing and making right decisions and doing it in a natural way, which I'm used to as a business sort of operator in my past. So some of those things, well, we'll see. I mean, it's early days. We've only done this for a year, but so far so good.
How do you typically like to structure your work day or work week? How is like your working methods evolved? Because obviously you've been a leader in high pressure situations, but I don't know in this role if you're a bit more flexible in terms of how you allocate your time, right? How's that evolved?
Well, that's quite interesting because as we have been building up Sandwater, it's kind of like skiing and then you're putting the poles in front of you, right? Because we are building up processes and ways to work and cooperate as we are developing. And that has to do with sort of dividing responsibilities between the team, making the right processes, not too stringent, not too light. So in a way, we are creating a bit of a work structure with sort of team meetings and ever, but most of the work is quite free in the sense that it's flexible, which is both a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's a blessing in the sense that I can do meetings in the morning, I can go to work, and then I can do meetings in the afternoon somewhere else, and it's all fine. But we do need to have a minimum interaction space. So we try to have a bit of structure, but we have a lot of distributed freedom. But once it becomes something, if there's an investment we're looking at, once it becomes something that then we need to put into a process. So there's a lot of freedom initially. I'm generally a bit of my wife says that she can't understand how I can sort of manage a lot of people because I'm can be quite disorganized, but it's an organization in my head despite of that. So it's a little bit of macro organized and micro disorganized. And also I'm quite impulsive, and I'm happy and quite often jump on things. But as I said, we have some more structured people on my team, luckily. And I think, again, I'm very fond of complementary setups, because I don't believe that you can be good if you're 4 or 5 that are coming from the same. You need to have different, things. So I'm more on the less structured guy, but I also know that if you're good at giving people a lot of flexibility and freedom, and people get trust, and then people deliver.
Yeah. How does your learning process look like? Because obviously you are going to evaluate so many cases all the time. Tech comes and goes, trends comes and goes, and you always need to dive into certain topics. Do you have a framework on how you sort of self-improve all the time, that you can truly understand different businesses? Or is it about interacting with smart people, discussing? Or do you say that, okay, I need focus time to really dive for myself to really understand this product?
I think I've come to the realization that I can try to look at certain patterns. And when it comes to tech, of course, there are very tech specific things that I can spend time, but I don't understand. But I can maybe ask some of the right questions. But then we need to have people with us. Luckily, we have a PhD in physics on our team, and often he ends up sort of looking at the more complicated stuff. But then, of course, we need to be good at sort of realizing quickly, where does our sort of depth stop, and how do we bring in people that can help us. But I think it's more about trying to ask the right questions, and maybe filter quite early what the key questions are. And then after that, it's about sort of handing it over to, or having people that can help you go in the necessary depth. So I think it's more about pattern recognition, trying to ask questions that give you an indication of where the opportunities and the red flags are, and then work from that, go deeper into after you've gotten that sort of first map of the terrain, if you will.
Interesting. If you're forecasting a bit ahead, what makes you most excited about the next period come up right now? Is it starting to fully invest in cases? Is that sort of the most exciting stuff right now?
Well, if I can call it exciting and challenging, and maybe sort of uncertainty at the same time, I think first of all, obviously getting Sandwater up to sort of level 1 with the fund, we're hiring for a couple of new people now, so it'll be 7 soon. Is obviously to get in mode of sort of regular investments. But then, of course, also realizing that it's quite a challenging outlook. Where is the market going? How do you pace yourself in investing? Because I think it's a very good time to be investing in the next couple of years. At the same time, it's challenging because there's so much uncertainty. How do you pace, but at the same time, don't be too conservative, because then you will lose some opportunities. But of course, it's working out and establishing Sandwater in the Nordic venture scene, getting, obviously, you're only as good as your next or your last game, so you need to sort of get some good new companies in your portfolio, and also be in a position to get the right deal flow and so on. So it's all about, for us, Sandwater has gone through a couple of growth steps already, and now is the next sort of step, sort of establishing, getting a business going, getting a portfolio, showing that you can deliver with the new team, and then getting into all the stuff. I mean, there's so many interesting topics we could talk about. I could stay here with you for a week, but getting into that as well, and finding those hopefully those really good opportunities to work with.
What is your best tactic to have some freedom and get away from work? Do you have any activities that completely takes you away? I mean, before we got on air, we talked a bit about the nature, of course. Do you have any activities you do to try to take some time?
Yeah, I have too many. That's the problem. So I don't get to do as many as I'd like. But I'm generally I do a lot of hunting, which is sort of taking my dog, and it's mostly for the social part and getting out. But also kayaking and mountain biking and randonnée skiing and stuff like that. So I think, again, I have I guess I have not enough time to do what I would like to do, so I'm always with a bad conscience. But at the same time, it's the luxury of doing and maybe having lived for a while is also that I understand more and more how I protect myself and how I can sort of play all the work and then still find time to do other things. And that's obviously partly also with that you're getting smarter in how you prioritize. But I guess I'm like anybody else. I'm always with a bad conscience of things that I should have done instead of spending time in the office or something.
Yeah, just a couple of more questions left. We usually ask our guests about their favorite books. Do you have any that comes to mind that you've read that have been very influential to your thinking? Or
I'm quite fond of sort of historical dramas, and that also gives you a sense of understanding what happened at the time. One of the books that I read, it's not that it's sort of, but it sticks with me. Is a book. It's called Pillars of the Earth. It was written by it slips me at the time, but it will come to me. But Ken Follett, and the thing was that it's about a mason, a guy who built churches back in 1100s in the UK. And you start with a very micro and the story is there, but you understand that he's just a piece of a big evolution that was happening around. It was a very pivoting point. But those sort of understanding, the dynamics and how small pieces and large pieces work together, and then it's a way of sort of understanding a whole period of time, and that is a book that I still, it's 20 years ago, 25 years ago since I read it. And I read a book of the same guy recently, and that was about something as dramatic as the Third World War and the threat of atomic nuclear war, which, again, putting it into a context of what's happening today. So this sort of understanding history by the little man's story and how that sort of plays together, I think is something that probably is the first thing that comes to mind.
That's a very original answer as well, because nobody has brought that up. So I think people should definitely check that out. So just a final question. We have so many listeners in their 20s and their 30s who are sort of starting their career, right? And you touched upon a lot of lessons already, but is your general advice for people you meet in finance who want to work with investing, etc.? Do you tell them any specific advice on how to get ahead, or is it about taking the opportunities you're given and sort of the route will follow thereafter? You can't really plan too much.
I think you can't really plan too much. I do believe. I think the old thinking that maybe was more earlier when you had a career plan. I mean, forget about that. I think it's obviously important, and I do understand that if you come out of school, that it's really important to get into certain, companies or jobs or something that creates a base for you, so you can, and that's super important. But at the same time, I think also be true in a way to also something that gives you real, in a way, satisfaction. And I'm very conscious that it's easy for me to say that, have lived for a while, whereas it's tougher when you're there making tough choices. But make sure that you don't work too much against the principles that you have. Make sure that you, over time, are also thinking about the purpose, what do you want to do with this thing. And don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to try things and not necessarily know how the outcome is going to be. So that's general. I think generally as an employer, people value a lot, obviously, that you have done good in school and you picked the right employer, but value that you are also trying to do things that are a little bit out of the ordinary, that you are willing to try, because a lot of people appreciate that you have that in you. So eventually you have to enjoy what you do. So I would say, follow your heart a bit more than the head if you can, and then, stay in there.
Perfect ending, Tom Even. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you learned something new. If you like this content, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you later.